welcome back to PA Truck Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Blair. Hi Blair, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you, Manny?
I'm good. I do want to start this episode by giving you a big appreciation message. I messaged you very last second, and you dropped in really quickly. So we do really appreciate you for joining us today.
Happy to do it for sure. Looking forward to it.
So we are aware on who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are. If you just give us a little rundown um, on everything that you do. As a strength coach and a business owner, my time is quite limited. My favorite part about being a coach is the fact that I get to interact with athletes and be with athletes and really coach them. That's why I use TeamBuildr. I remember the days of searching for exercises, manually typing them in, and spending hours on spreadsheets and organizing my programs. This tends to be quite tedious and a lot of time consuming, which meant that I wasn't able to coach as much. So now for my business, TeamBuildr is a non-negotiable. It's an all-in-one programming platform that lets you create and deliver workouts to your athletes just in a few clicks. With TeamBuildr, I can customize programs, track athletes' progress in real time, and generate performance reports. My athletes get full ownership of their progress and can even share feedback on how they felt the sessions going. Having this in place actually gives me more time to coach and be with my athletes. If you're ready to take your next step in your programming, give more time to your athletes, head over to teambuildr.com and use promo code PAChalkup, that's PACHALQUP, and start your 30-day free trial.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's perfect. Like a quick, I guess, resume spiel, right? So, um, I played collegiate basketball, graduated in 2014. From there, my professional career actually started in high school coaching and teaching. From there, that went to high school teaching and part-time personal training. That evolved into a really deep love for continuing education, especially with personal training. I just realized that even though I've lived it and I personally enjoyed strength training through my collegiate career as well as post my collegiate career, there was just so much to know about people and how to meet them where they're at and what their needs are. And so when personal training became full time and I got promoted to management, um, that kind of just like hunger for education existed. And so I actually went to University of Miami. I was able to work with a lot of the athletic teams there, the basketball programs I was able to work with, track and field programs, swimming and diving, rowing, soccer. And so that kind of was like a catalyst for me transitioning my career from more general population as far as personal training goes into athletics, right? And so when I graduated from there, I actually had a short tenure at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, which was really impactful just insofar as the creation of systems and considering logistics and implementing effective training and providing really good coaching. And that evolved into a tenure at Northeastern. Northeastern was good for a lot of reasons. I'm sure that we'll talk about that today, but was able to work with a variety of the varsity athletic teams during my time at Northeastern. And that turned into a director of training role now at Pure Performance, which is a greater Boston area sports performance gym. That's me. That's where I'm at.
Nice. So I always love to talk about the PTing route, or we Brits call PT personal training instead of um, physical therapy. I was very confused when I was in the US and people were saying, "Oh, that's the PTs," and I was like, "But they're physios."
Right,
And
right,
like, yeah,
right, right, right.
personal phys.
Yes,
Yeah. So I was like, okay, it's like the football and soccer thing. We won't get into it in this episode.
definitely. No,
Um, but I always love when people mention that route because I'm going to presume that you were with general population and coaching them and trying to get their, as weird as this is going to sound, like the business side of it takes a lot more of the softer skills, the more empathy and sort of relationship building that then carries on very strongly when you have athletes that are younger, they're more moldable, you need to educate them a little bit more. How did you sort of find going from that PT setting to a more collegiate setting where now you've got athletes that you are influencing and sort of molding into this being a habit for them?
So everyone evolves throughout their career, right? At least you hope they do. And
Yes.
if I'm being honest, I think that because I had lived collegiate athletics and I had been influenced by personal trainers that made statements such as, "Well, everyone's an athlete, we're just at different levels." Um, I was on that bandwagon. I don't necessarily think that I if I was to see, general population clients today, there's 100% differences. So I think if anything, it's really just an evolution. Like I was training people for strength, no doubt, and like that's important, right? There are absolutely health
Movement quality.
markers
Yeah.
that would signify that increasing strength is, at least from like a novice to maybe an intermediate or something, has benefits. But strength for the goal of strength, as we talked before, right? The If we're just trying to pump our lats, like that's not health, and then pain is not what people want when they're leaving
Mhm.
the gym. Maybe they think that it is, but it's not. And so I think, truthfully, it wasn't so different, other than I think really having or gaining an appreciation for things such as um, metabolic needs, sport to sport, right? Your lens evolves around that, where I didn't have a lens. Now I'm applying that with athletes. I appreciate the sentiment of power output being important for adults, because rate of contractility diminishes in adult populations, and so you want to ensure that they're being dosed that. Again, a lot of times we think, well, training for people should be, what are you not getting, and how can I fill buckets to ensure that you're able to. So for Gen Pop, it's live your life, right? And so maybe it's avoiding falls, as you kind of like
Mhm.
think long term. For athletes, it's outputs, and it's being able to display their physicality. And so I think I just learned a lot that I did better, but I don't know that any of those initial concepts totally 180'd. It was really just like, okay, I'm learning how to do things and I'm applying them more strategically.
When we were speaking before the podcast, and you've sort of touched on, but you seem to have like these lenses that you carry on through different specifics of this industry. Can you break down what that means and how you look through these different lenses for different buckets or different performance requirements?
So if I think about me as a practitioner, right, as a sports performance coach, I think there's a lot to like kind of unpack that. So like an initial lens is, how are you insofar as your coaching ability? So that's the relational aspect. And I think, amongst everything that we're scared to go through with technology evolving, coaching always has to exist. And I think personal relationships are always going to exist. And so a pillar of my practice I would call values based coaching, and I have that
Mm.
well defined for myself, and I share that with other practitioners, just to support them in evolving their own coaching practice. Right. I'm very fortunate that during my tenure at Northeastern, I also decided to do a formal education in coaching and leadership, and so I do
Mm.
have my master's in organizational leadership with an emphasis in coaching. And so I've pulled a lot of, just as I was going through those years of studying, right? What is important to apply, and then after I did that, I consolidated that, and that's like kind of easy for me to pull from quickly for myself. But again, it's a model that I can utilize to make me effective in my coaching practice. So then we can unpack that lens for sure. The next one would be um, a principles based practice. And so I think we have to appreciate that there are laws and principles that we are governed by, right? And like
Mhm.
that that can get really like nerdy and out there, but at the same time, um, at least at like a minimum, there are things that we should appreciate and understand. And then kind of manifesting from that are things that we can apply that become practical. And so I try to define those principles for myself. So, and if I believe them to be true, then I have them to leverage when I go to uh, intervene insofar as an athlete's program, or what I'm dosing, how frequently, etc. And then a tertiary from that is an evidence based decision making lens. And so I derive my KPIs and I try to ensure that, and it's even one of my principles, it's, data informed decisions, which is what are the KPIs when you look at the data that you've collected, whether it's on a weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis, a monthly basis, and that just depends on what the test itself is. um, how are you taking that and then allowing it to influence your decision making and having
Hmm.
at least a framework for starting to dissect that.
How do you differentiate the evidence based? So I'm guessing this is coming from science backed papers where um, they're peer reviewed and everything else. How are you making sure that they're practical to what you're doing as opposed to just seeing something that looks good and just trying to apply it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I like to think so. I mean, I have as you did, and you spoke to him earlier. Just the people who influence me and my mentors, right? So I have a definite appreciation for. So again, one of the principles that I leverage would be structure dictates function, right? And that's like a biological um, principle that just governs us, right? Like I can't do anything if my structure is not supporting that. It's not positioned to do so. And so um, when I talk about, and it can be easy to get lost in minutia, but when I talk about managing someone's center of mass or having movement options, that then influences the position that I put them in, or it at least allows me to appreciate trade-offs. And so if I know that if I'm going to dose you, you know, this exercise, and this exercise is going to put you in this position, and I know that the more frequently you see that position, you're going to adapt because that's biology, right? And that's what we do. It's like, well, then how can I put you into other positions, and how can I kind of stack those exercises together in a way that doesn't come at such a great cost to your other movement options or your ability to express some of your rotational capabilities, let's say. And so I try to get very clear on those things in order to ensure that, okay, well, here's the methods and here are the movements that come from those
Mhm.
principles.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. You've also just touched on that you actually have a coaching degree, and a lot of people overlook that, like because it's like obviously we're strength and conditioning coaches or PTs, like we know like the adaptations and the principles that we're trying to follow, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a coaching ability. It just means that you really know the science behind what we're doing, right? So
Sure,
I
of
also did
course.
coaching degree, and for me, it wasn't so much that it was a requirement that I needed to go to university. So I did that before university, but it taught me like the runnings, the pacings, the things that we're not taught as sports scientists or kinesiologists, and like the
Of course.
science heavy things. It actually teaches you more of the okay, if a kid goes away for a toilet and he's not back in 10 minutes, you need to go check on that because there's
Sure.
something going on. It's
Sure.
like these very minute things that can trip you up in a session that you kind of have to account for when you're planning the session. So I think that was really dope that you mentioned because not a lot of people consider that to be important.
Yeah, well, I think the reason, and maybe it's not, but I like to think that the reason might just be that those concepts aren't challenging to understand, right? But
Hmm.
oh my gosh, though, but applying them effectively and just appreciating relationships, like I said, and that people are different. And look, I appreciate too, like, I'm not going to be the right person for everyone, but if
Hmm.
I can increase the probability that I'm right for most people, and I know the background that I have with regard to like the knowledge that I have, that just helps me. Like, first of all, nobody, what is that saying? Like, nobody cares how much you know until they know you care.
Hmm.
So that's, I mean, just appreciating that that's true. If and again, like, you can write the best again, Mike Boyle says
Yep.
this, and I do appreciate this a lot because I believe that it's true. It's like you could write the best program in the whole world, and if you're not the right coach to implement that program, and I don't mean I mean, I do also mean like tactically and technically, like, how to do the thing.
Hmm.
But I also mean more than that. It's like, if you believe that I'm the right person to get you where you're going,
Yeah.
you're going to show up more disciplined. You're going to be more focused. You're going to give me the intent that I'm trying to elicit, and the results are going to be better just
Hmm.
because you believe it. And so that's
Yeah.
huge. We have to appreciate that.
100%. Me, so I've previously had Coach Mike Boyle on that you probably know. Um, and that's two things that we spoke about was the creation of the bucket filling method, which again, it's something that I follow closely. I need to look at individual needs and what they need for that session and match whatever requirements they need. But then it was the whole thing of like you've just mentioned, like you can write the best program ever, but if that athlete knows you don't give a shit, he's not going to do it. He's not going to care enough to want to make you follow that program the way that you intended it. Like he doesn't care. He doesn't like you. And it's like how
Sure.
can
Right.
we then go and make sure that they're following it? Because if they've lost it, then like how do you bring that back?
It'd be very, very hard.
One of the main reasons that I followed you and started wanting to get you on was that you do a lot of work with Hawkin Dynamic and specific tests and how they influence and implement throughout your program. Can you talk a little about that and how it works and what it is that you find so fascinating and interesting in adding those KPIs in?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll kind of just go and ask me anything for clarification. But I definitely have an appreciation, and Hawken did a really good job of just kind of laying all of this out. Well, I don't know if I love how Hawken defines everything, at least like from like a layman's perspective, because I think that sometimes it can be really challenging. And I think if we just kind of go to what I would call introductory physics, and I would only say it that way because I taught it, and I found I was like, thank goodness I taught, this, because 4 years of just like repeat exposures to so much of what it ends up really being what is helpful. So I think just there's there's the definitions of the metrics that you can track, and those might get a little tough to understand. I know that there's a reason that they're defined the way they are. I just think for me, I've definitely taken the time to sit with them and make sure, like, okay, but what does it really mean? And
Mm-hmm.
then also, how does it transfer? And in that you get, which again Hawken has laid out brilliantly, is like your outputs, your drivers, your strategies. And so I I have such an appreciation for that, because it's like, well, um, outputs, like what was the result of all of that effort, and then the strategy is like, okay, and then how was that accomplished? And oh my gosh, there's so many details that you find when you
Hmm.
look at strategies, and then you have to go, and is this a good thing? So like, I'll give like a case in point. It's like, all right, you're jumping higher, that's awesome, but your time to take off is longer, and you have to go, well, you're a soccer player and you don't have more time. So
Hmm.
even though you're jumping higher, first of all, you don't need to jump in your sport. Second of all, I mean, you do. Okay, soccer players, sorry, we
Very
should be
limited.
saying football. We should be saying football. Um, but
Thank you.
but I'm in America and I'll conform. But um, yeah, so like, every now and again, yes, you have to jump. But what I
Yeah.
mean is like
I think
more
it's only
globally
certain
than that.
positions as well. So introducing it to the whole team, is it necessary?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think the jump, right, tells
Yeah.
me
The jump's important. Yeah. Yeah.
how. Yeah, so it's like, okay, things that I look at that communicate progress to me. How fast did you decelerate? So I look at your average braking velocity. I look at force at minimum displacement. How much force were you producing at the bottom of the jump before, moving to propulsion? What How counter movement depth, how far did you descend? And that tells me something, right? And so I look at time metrics. So I look at, velocity metrics, time metrics, displacement metrics, and then we start to look at those at different phases, and then we look at what was the output of all of that work. So in saying all of that, right, it's like, if I my counter movement depth is shallower, is that because I've lost some of the ability to load into my tissues because I've become more stiff and more rigid?
Mm.
Maybe. And then it's like, well, is because I think we can all appreciate, right? It's like too much stiffness and I can't properly load my tissues. But not enough stiffness, and it's like you are not effective at all. Like it's very slow, and we're in and we're out, and it's like this like wah wah, kind of like
Mhm.
movement.
To
So
find
it's like
balance. Yeah.
there's a right amount for sure, and I do look at kind of finding that process of counter movement depth, so showing me that you have the options to load that tissue as kind of fine tuning, right? It's like there's going to be an optimal place that you exist that allow you to execute that quickly, right? So we can descend into that space, right? We can show me that braking velocity is able to get you to that depth faster, that the amount of force generated is likely higher, right, as we descend. Not always, and sometimes that could be a good thing, right? Like force production for the sake of force production. Like I can tell you to stand on a force plate and rip yourself down super hard, as hard as you
Mhm.
can, and that's going to be a totally different strategy than okay, and then I want you to turn that around and I want you to jump, right? So
Yep.
sometimes actually what you can find too is the force that you produce at the bottom of that jump is actually more effective when it's produced with less force. And then you have to appreciate too, it's like then wow, that's so much more efficient. If you're telling me that I can get a better output producing less force, that's less tax, onto the body, less physical demand onto the body. Wow, we've just increased your efficiency a lot. And so while there's so many other variables around force
Mm.
plates, right? There's actually being in the game and executing that thing. The trends you would have to appreciate show you at least there's adaptation occurring, and you would it's one of those like face validity things, right? Like does this transfer over to that? And it's like, well, there's enough of this that looks like this that I can infer that yes, it would transfer over, and yes, therefore your training is effective. And again, we're limited to the what we have access to, and I would say it's probably better than a soccer player who's barbell bench pressing and
Mhm.
telling me that they're getting better, right? It's like, one is definitely closer and tells me more than the other.
Yeah.
Not that I'm not barbell bench pressing soccer players because I still will.
Um, we were kind of talking off before the podcast, and we were talking about that practical application of the test that you're performing. And it's something that you're sort of touching on, and how how do you then like make sure that the tests that they're performing are driving that data to what metrics that they're actually performing and seeing in the field get better?
Yeah. So a word that I like a lot is transferability.
Hmm.
And it's like, is your training transferring onto the court, the field, the ice? And ideally, you're at least looking at yourself going, yeah, yes, it is. And and then you're able to kind of rationalize, and you're able to like explain to yourself, yes, and this is why. But um, from I'll tell you like one change that I've made in my practice. So there are absolutely sports and positions that you need to have the ability to like just withstand a lot of like force against force, right? So like those kind of like manage those ground
These
reaction
cells.
forces. You've got someone pushing on you, right? Think your offensive lineman, your center in basketball. That like force for the sake of force production is actually going to give you that advantage, right? But if we're talking about a quick ground contact time, there's definitely an ideal amount of like force production that transfers into movement variability, and then force production into movement variability, because I have to hit the ground, get away from the ground, hit the ground, get away from the ground. So I have to appreciate, like, there's a reason. Well, I do believe that the sport kind of selects the athlete because there's a
Mm.
morphology component, right? There's definitely a genetic bias, but a power lifter is never going to be your world class sprinter just from like a morphology perspective. And so there's a reason for that. But kind of outside of that is like going back to that center example, or that offensive lineman. Maybe if we're talking about a testing battery, I go ahead and I dose you um, those rep max, right? The 3 rep max, the 1 rep max. Maybe we dose those because it's relevant for like what you do.
Mhm.
There's transferability and your ability to showcase that you're capable of doing that. But for most sport athletes, I've moved, and I'm fortunate, like I have a gym aware. So like
Mm.
I do have the ability to showcase power output. And so the upper body metric that I track from a strength power perspective is actually power bench, which is I have you
Mm.
stand on the force plate, you weigh in, and then you take that number, you cut it in half, and you show me 3 reps of as fast as you can, you're taking that bar off the chest, right? And again, is there a one-to-one transferability? No, but it allows me to showcase progress in the way of power production, upper body power production. It's a relative metric because we're at
Mm-hmm.
least we're
Mm-hmm.
factoring now your body weight into the equation, and then we're able to go, hey, this is closer to the task that you have to perform because there's a velocity component. And I'd rather you see that the gains that you're making are more related to what you're trying to achieve than just the bench press for the sake of the bench press.
Mm-hmm.
So I do that. I do power bench and I do power trap bar. And when I do power trap bar, I do it as a power curve. And I want to see where do you best showcase power output. And then from there, I'll kind of either bias like the speed strength or strength speed side of that spectrum, or I'll just say like, let's go for power output. Um, Appreciating that when it comes to now like my lower body, there's so much more. There's so much more force production that's produced. I mean, our
Mm-hmm.
muscles look the way they do for a reason. We have quads that look the way they do and biceps look the way they do because one definitely takes on a lot more load than the other and needs to have the ability to create that mechanical tension. So um, yeah, I think going ahead and like pushing and just seeing like absolute power output in the trap bar versus the relative power output of the upper body, that starts to kind of rein
Mm.
some things in for me. And again, speaking on transferability and progress that's relevant to the athlete's task. So that's getting
Yeah.
into like my power metrics.
You said something really interesting there, and it's taking that weight and making it so that the movement speed is like incorporated into it. Um, we've had Thomas Newman on previously, and he sort of mentioned this progressive of athletic ability, and it goes from your normal like 3 to 1 rep maxes. Cool. Once they can do that, like, can they squat X amount of their body weight? Cool. After that, it's kind of looking into like what's the next metrics to track performances always increasing, because like not all athletes are going to need to perform like 2 times body weight squat. It's not beneficial to everyone, but what would be the next best thing to test them on? And it's so if we're talking about like a back squat, it's like the uh 1 per second, like can they squat a certain amount of body weight for that speed specifically? And it then like what's the next thing? And it's like that cognitive, like can they perform a task and can they move weight quickly? So it's like it's always finding these like next levels. And I really appreciate that you said like you do bench and you track trap bar for that same reason. It's like not all athletes, again, like I've just mentioned, are going to need to uh, 2 times or 3 times their body weight. So like what can we measure and what is practical for them to track to see that their performance is still increasing?
Well, and then to your point too, I mean, when you're putting an athlete in an environment that's insanely variable, right? I like force production, right? Appreciating that, the larger the muscle fibers and the potential to not be able to like kind of down regulate that tone. Um, and so just like a constant increase in mechanical tension um, might actually slow that athlete down, right? And like I will tell you, like, talk about epiphanies, that kind of come full circle because I'm a strength coach overwhelmingly because I was a weight room athlete. Like, I truly
Hmm.
believed that, hey, if you squat the most on the team and you bench the most on the team, that at least gives you the most athletic potential to execute on the court. And that is only true to a point when you're in the position that I was in, right? So, I played as a power forward in college, and it's like I could have afforded to run the floor a little faster. And so while there's definitely things about my structure that aren't the most helpful when it comes to speed, I could have definitely, like, if you would have put timing gates out for me and told me, hey, but sprinting is a part of this whole thing too, right? And it's like, you're limited to the information you have. And so there's so, strength and conditioning still is so much in its infancy, and you have to appreciate that this whole thing around sports performance is going to continue to evolve. But like,
Hmm.
if you could have given me that metric at the time, which like I didn't see a timing gate through my high school, my college. Like I just didn't. And so it's like if you would have given me a metric and allowed me the opportunity to reckon with something other than just load, I
Mm,
do think knowing, my type A, you know, yes, more means better. I would have also have taken that into other places too, where it's like, have me run a 5-10-5 for time, have me run a sprint for time, and then let me kind of grapple with, okay, there's more to this.
mhm.
And so the transferability in that way, I think would have been overwhelmingly helpful to just kind of frame my mind around other outputs that actually probably have more transferability to what I'm trying to be great at. And so I think for athletes, that's just becomes so important.
100%. When we were talking about sort of speaking with each other and coming on the podcast, I like to ask this question because, again, it shows more that, like, if you only had that one thing, you can still make a great program. And I asked, and you said, thankfully, I don't have to.
I did. Like, I'm
um,
spoiled. I really am. I do have a lot of pieces of technology to play with, but
mhm.
go on.
So, what's that one metric that you would look at if you could only pick one, and why is that? Like, why is that such a key aspect for you to consider?
So, all right.
If
I'm
it
gonna say
helps,
one. I'm gonna say one that has two
yep,
driver metrics that really give me three. But um, I like,
cheat
I
codes.
don't know that it's the most popular either, but I actually really like jump momentum a lot. And
Hmm.
the reason for that is because it takes into account takeoff velocity and your system weight. So it becomes a relative metric. So if I'm gaining weight but taking off at the same speed, that metric goes up. And I would say the ability for me to manage myself at a greater mass at the same, after as it was before, huge, right? That is definitely an indicator of success. And I mean, if you're talking about contact sport athletes, huge. Like anybody could afford to use their mass at the same speed
Hmm.
so long as that's actually what you're doing, right? Like so I like that one a lot. I think again, like if it's communicating progress. um if I look at takeoff velocity, that is like the outcome of we loaded and then we took off and there was a speed at which you took off, and that indicates that we did it at a specific rate. And that rate being higher, to me, oftentimes signifies all of the strategy before gave you a positive outcome. And we're not looking at jump height. We're not looking at we're really isolating it to speed in that way. And speed kills, man. Like speed on the court of the field. Like
Hmm.
if we have it relative to everybody else, like that's the athletic potential to then dominate in your domain. And so I think I would choose that one.
Perfect.
I don't
Um,
like making me choose one though.
it's hard questions. We get the hard questions here.
No, I'm for it. I'm
um,
for it.
was one hill that you would die on in this industry?
Mm, you did not prep me for that question.
No, we like raw.
I'm with it. The first place my mind went was, you know, exercise, right? Like, what about
Mhm.
exercise? And then it's like, no, we already answered this question. Like, the hill I would die on is that your ability to coach, and like, I mean, coach through, hey, I know who I am. I know exactly what I'm asking from you. I know who I am and I know how I'm going to show up. And operating with that level of transparency and integrity to have a relationship where somebody who comes and invests in me knows I'm going to
Mhm.
invest tenfold in them. Like you establish that,
Yeah,
that's where it's
coaching
at.
aside.
Yeah, the coaching side, it has to be. Yeah, I mean, there's so many roads that lead to Rome, right?
Mhm.
Like, there's so many ways to do this thing truthfully. But your ability as a coach is 100% going to dictate your success.
100%. On the back of that, what would be some advice that you would give new strength coaches or coaches coming into this industry?
Stay curious. I like the word curious a lot,
Oh,
right?
yes,
It's
yes,
like
yes.
you know enough to be dangerous. Okay.
Hmm.
Leverage that. You know enough to be dangerous, but you're never going to know everything. Even, I mean, like the most, the most expert of the expert. Like, and I mean, if you're truly at the level of expert, then you really realize how much you don't know, because I swear
Mhm.
I knew more when I was 25 than I do now.
Oh, yes, yes.
You know, it's
So
like,
I
damn
I
it.
always
It's
say
like,
I always say
wait.
on this podcast, like, the more I speak to people, the less I know. And it's like it's a really weird concept because obviously I'm speaking with more, I'm getting more information, but like the less I feel like I actually know in terms of like as a whole. So I always recommend this book to people. It's called Show Your Work.
Cool.
And it's not actually related to this industry, but like I always feel like you can take something away from every industry and apply it to what we do. But it's
Oh,
like
absolutely.
it's pretty much on posting advice and how to create content, and it goes through this sort of
Okay.
principle where it's like the novice is more comfortable posting because they don't know any better. So they're not constantly having that overwhelming feeling of like, okay, I'm doing this. I feel like this is right, but this could also be wrong for different reasons. So we get into this
Yeah.
cycle of I'm not going to post it because there's
Oh, I
people
know
are
we
going
do. Oh
to
my
pick it
gosh.
apart. So it's like you kind of become paralyzed because you know so much, but then you also know very little, and it's this weird balance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're too aware of all that you don't know and probably
Hmm.
won't ever know. And then it's like there is an overwhelm to that for sure. But again, right, if we go back to kind of that question, it's like, no, you do know enough.
Hmm.
You know enough. Like, leverage what you do know, and like, and be honest in that, right? Like, but also keep seeking, keep growing, keep
Hmm.
learning, because you're never going to get there. And if you think you're there, you're probably not.
Yeah.
Just
So,
true.
and again, and piggyback back off that, I always keep a rubber duck on my desk.
Cool. Okay.
um, I get really interested in different industries and how they work and operate. And I was learning to code at one point, and they have this like coders and computer programmers, computer science have this theory. It's called the rubber duck theory, and it's essentially if something goes wrong in their code, they speak to the rubber duck and work through their process. So it kind of gives you
Okay.
that thing of you're explaining yourself to this rubber duck. It's not going to reply at any point, and if it does, you might need to seek some help. But
Yeah, right. You have another problem.
but it's this thing where if I'm stuck on any problem or any issue with like a method, a principle, or a program, or an athlete, I will speak to this rubber duck and be like, okay, this is what I know to be happening. This is what could potentially be the issues. How do I resolve them? And it's again, it's that thing of you have to be so aware of everything that's happening that you're kind of like analyzing each step as it goes and you're explaining it and trying to figure out how to be better, how to become more than what you are just now.
Definitely. I think that's brilliant. I think I like to think that that's what I do as I make my programming decisions for athletes, when it's like, cuz look, I don't bat a thousand. Like, and nobody
Mhm.
does. And I think honestly, like when it comes to force plate technology too, I think that's like another huge point of why a lot of coaches don't use it. I think it's scary to go back and look and go, wait a minute, like I think I'm doing
Mhm.
everything right for this athlete and they're still not getting better insofar as my understanding of these metrics and how I'm interpreting them, I'm seeing that they're not getting better. And that, when you already know that there's a bunch you don't know and you're trying to like still work in this field
Mhm.
that's super competitive and that, everybody's telling you they have the answer, like
Very fast paced as
that's
well.
who. And yes, the evolution of what we're doing is it's constant. And so it's like that's such a vulnerable place to be in. And that's why it's like, so then really you should look at it, right? But that's
Mhm.
hard to like break through for people, because like your ego gets involved, right? And you're like,
Yep.
no, I can't not know an answer because I have people coming to me that need me to know the answer, so I can't not know the answer. So therefore, I'm not going to look at the evidence.
Mhm.
That, because
Yep.
that's tough, especially
Like
when
this
it's
is
like
why
you don't know the solution, or you don't have a,
100%.
yeah, you don't have
You don't
the
have that
tools
piece
for a
yet. Yeah.
solution yet.
Yeah.
And yet, but then again,
Yes.
curious. Be
Yes.
curious because you'll find
Um,
it.
one of my lecturers has this brilliant thing, and if someone ever comes up to her and is like, "Oh, I can't do this," she stops them immediately and says, "Yet."
Sure,
Like she will
sure.
speak over the top of them, and she's like, "Yeah," and they're like, yeah, you don't know it yet. You will. You just have to give it time. And it's that curiosity and that thing of always wanting to get better.
Yeah.
Um, One thing that I really like about this sort of podcast and how I'm able to bring these guests on is like I'm by no means an expert in anything, but I can at least speak to people that are like better than me at that specific thing, and I can ask them, which I love to do. Is like if I'm not sure on one thing specifically, I know exactly who to go to. Like like anything, I'm not a PT, never wanted to be a PT, but I guess it's always a part of what we do. We always have to mitigate and sort of bring athletes back to a way that they're better than when they got injured.
Sure.
So I always go to Josh Chung for this, and he's phenomenal because of like how his mind works. He's always exploring. He's always running experiments on himself. So like for me, anytime I've got a question, I'm just like shoot Josh a message. He'll get back to me when he gets back to me. But when he does, it's like so detailed, and I'm like, okay, now I know more
That's
because I've
kind.
spoke
Yeah, that's cool.
to this person. So like I also love this industry. Although not everyone speaks, I'm fortunate enough to be able to speak to people that are willing to speak. But it's that thing where you also have to ask questions to get answers that you don't know.
Sure. Sure. I totally
What's
agree.
some resources or reading material that you would recommend people look into?
Um, are we're talking like sports performance specifically.
Yeah, yeah, industry based.
Um, mm, might I might be controversial on this a little bit.
Let's
But
go.
well, you know what? All right. Let me maybe back out of saying that. I don't think it would be controversial to look at like Evan Pycon's work about just from developing a lens just on metabolic adaptations and energy system development. Um, I think he's done great work. You know what? I would be remiss not to say Lee Taft. I really like Lee Taft's work. And you know what? I think just kind of talking about some like very foundational speed based patterns that you want to ensure that your athletes are exposed to so that they can develop them and then transfer again them onto the field. Um, Huge. And that's not those, neither of those are controversial um, at all. I think if you are interested in having like an appreciation, so I really do like gaining a better understanding of the way our body moves, so biomechanics,
Mm,
and less about kind of how muscles pull on each other, because I think that we got a lot of that in like undergrad and grad school, but um, more so from the perspective of how do bones actually kind of rotate on each other, and when is that optimal and when is that not optimal anymore. And so uh, that's really, if I've been growing a lens for the last few years now, and then because when you appreciate like how the skeleton moves, then I think you can gain more of an appreciation for like your contractile tissue behavior, so your muscles, and then you can gain more of an appreciation for like connective tissue behavior.
mm,
um, but really getting into the biomechanics, and there's some great resources with regard to like Bill Hartman, Shawn Astorga, uh, Zach Couples, like, and they, I mean, they all have like really well built out like education platforms. And so in that sense, you're not being left with just like an Instagram account. Like each of
mm,
those people do have like very well organized platforms that you could like continue education. And
mhm.
so um I think that's kind of like
Yeah,
where I would
perfect.
lie. Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on today. I know you're a little bit
absolutely.
pushed for time. If you can let people know where to reach you and sort of ask more questions on things that we've spoke
Definitely.
about.
Yeah, so built for this sports performance is the Instagram account. That's really where I do have like a Facebook page that all that same information goes and whatnot. Yeah, I put most of my information on there, and to be honest, I don't have like a very strong like online presence. It's not something that I've really like doubled down on developing, but um I'm very happy to I mean, as I've started, because that Instagram account it's not even a year old yet, and I just put concepts on there that I think are helpful to spark thoughts, or how I do things. And I'm happy to always connect, though truthfully I think that I'll tell you before we get off here, because I do know I have to go, but one of my like personal human values is altruism, and I think, man, we got to leave this thing better than we found it.
Mm,
And I think that's my education background, as well as just who I am. And so I'm very happy to connect and kind of continue any conversation.
100%. I really appreciate you, Blair.
I appreciate you too, man. It was really great to meet you today. And we'll do it again sometime, huh?
Perfect. Peace.